Okay, guys, we are continuing on with our interviews with all the Calcasieu Parish Sheriff's candidates here at Legally Armed America, and we've got a few behind us. And today we're meeting with Dustin Abshire. Dustin Abshire is kind enough to give us the time to answer the 5 questions that we sent out. We're about done wrapping up all the candidates that are participating. And Dustin, we want to get started right away with this. Again, thank you, sir, for joining us today.
Appreciate you having me.
We're going to get rolling right in here with number one. Number one, do you support the law-abiding people of Calcasieu Parish constitutional right to purchase and own all currently available firearms, including AR-15s, along with standard capacity magazines that can hold 30 rounds or more?
So, yes, I own AR-15s. I have 2 myself. I have several different assault rifles in my possession, so I support the ownership of them. I support being able to purchase them, carry them. I don't have any issues with that.
I'm just curious, with the constant barrage and almost weekly, and we've shown this in some of the other interviews, that the White House continues to say almost on a weekly basis that we need to ban AR-15s and we need to ban what they call high capacity magazines, which, as we all know, they're standard capacity 30 round magazines. There's gazillions of them in circulation right now. That's the standard. What if the federal government were to continue to push and maybe eventually be successful at banning those rifles and those magazines? How would you approach that as sheriff of the parish?
You know, that's one of those things, I'm a little different than the other candidates. I'm a lawyer, so my perspective on things, my ethics are a little bit different to what I have to uphold and follow through. And I can tell you, if something were to happen, it would depend. You know, we had different things that were implemented and different things that were done over the past few years with COVID and different things like that that weren't, some things were enforced, some things weren't pushed forward. And I'd say with something like that, as far as for if there would be a ban in it, if it goes back to what it was in previous administrations, whenever they weren't allowed to be sold by gun owners, or they weren't allowed to go, or the manufacturers to process it, obviously I got no control or nothing on that. Mm-hmm. But as far as for the ownership of them, I don't think I've seen anything or know anything where it would be where they've said some sort of retroactive where you can't legally own what you've already owned before. So I don't think that would become an issue as sheriff, but if it would become an issue, that would be something we'd have to deal with at that time.
From my standpoint, even a grandfathering of the old guns and a ban of any new guns is kind of pointless when you have however many millions of them already in circulation. So
I agree.
I don't feel like they can accomplish anything without an outright ban. I'm certainly not in favor of that. I'm just saying it's absolutely pointless unless you ban them and confiscated them. If that were the route that they took, how would you approach that, knowing that all of those guns were purchased legally by law-abiding Americans?
Again, that would be one of those things that would depend on what the actual law was and what the actual enforcement of it was. You know, if it's coming out, I don't know if you've seen, but people ask me all the time on Facebook or different things, my Second Amendment and my thoughts on it and those kind of things. And I kind of put out a post where our Second Amendment right is pointless without the rights of the others. You know, through due process, through all of our other rights, gives us one. One doesn't overstep the other, and I think if they're violating our rights to due process or violating our other civil liberties as far as for that to do it, then I think we're going to have some issues. But I think there'd be enough pushback. But I'll say we can have hypotheticals about what they're going to do. Legally, I just don't see where they could do that based on all of our rights.
I want to make sure that we address those hypotheticals because literally the leader of the free world, if you want to call him that, is Joe Biden right now. And he's made posts. Sunday was one, I think 2 days ago, and then last week there was another one. So this is not something they're letting go. So no disrespect. The fact that they won't let it go seems like more of a realism than a hypothetical to me. And that's why we want to make sure that we address this, because if there's a condition that you could see where you would not enforce whatever ban that they recommended, that's what we're looking for. I'm curious, at what point would you say that's the line that's being drawn and I'm not going to enforce that as sheriff?
You know, I guess it's kind of where you talked about to the far extremes, you know, where people are being sent to take guns out of your houses. You know, that's, you know, if we get to that point in this country where we're going to extreme levels, then there's going to be issues.
I mean, just to be clear, I think we're at extreme levels right
Yeah.
now.
Oh no, we're at levels we've never been at before.
This is not a cakewalk
Yeah.
that we're in right now.
Yeah.
Just to be clear on that.
Yeah.
We'll move on to number 2. Do you believe law-abiding citizens should be able to give, loan, or sell a gun to a friend or family member without filling out a federal background check? And of course, what I'm talking about there is there's this constant, again, from the federal government, discussion about, quote, universal background checks. We know that there are already background checks nationwide that are mandated if you purchase a firearm from an FFL or a retail outlet. This is simply private sales. The federal government is indicated that they're very, very serious about outlawing private sales, to where if I wanted to sell you a gun without going and filling out a background check, it's legal for me to do that right now.
Right.
As long as I assume you're not a felon or a prohibited person, I can sell you that gun without any exchange whatsoever regarding an FFL. What they're wanting to do is outlaw that. What are your thoughts on that?
So it's kind of different. In my head, there's 2 different parts to it. There's the selling part that you're talking about, selling to friends and gun trading and things like that, which is one issue. Then the other issue is kind of, like you said, the family part. You know, whether you're inheriting your gun from your grandfather, your dad, or whatever, those things I 100% don't see where there's any issues in if it's family heirlooms. You know, if it's your grandfather's, gun from war, from the war, stuff like that. You know, when it comes to the selling and trading of guns, I've been between being in law enforcement for 15 years and a lawyer close to 28 years. The illegal gun, I say illegal gun exchange, while it's legal between criminals and stolen guns and all those kind of things, it kind of puts it in a gray area as to people exchanging guns. If one person who's legally, let's say you bought a rifle and you want to sell me a rifle and we're going hunting and you have 2 of them and I don't have one and I want to buy yours, I don't see anything wrong with that. Me and you hunt, I legally own guns. I don't think that the federal government, as far as for that exchange, it's not through a dealer, it's not through retail, it's not through those things. I don't see any issues. The issue comes into whenever it's you get a gun illegally or legally, and you give it, you sell it to me or get it to me.
Just describe how I would have gotten it illegally. I'm just curious what you think about that.
If it's a stolen gun, or if it's something that you've gotten that you shouldn't be possessing, if you're a convicted felon, or if you have certain, where you shouldn't legally possess the gun. So if that's where it comes into, it's where I guess more my concerns are the guns that are in the hands of criminals, the guns that are in the hands of those committing crimes of violence, those getting those guns into those hands. And that's kind of where, I'll be honest with you, that's where the struggle comes for me, being a gun owner, being a supporter of the Second Amendment, being one that I believe that we should all be able to have them and bear them if we want them. But then it comes to where the public safety's at risk, and there's so many guns in the hands of criminals. I see it every day when we're in court. The possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, you can go sit in a courtroom every day and there's probably a handful getting arraigned and a handful in criminal court, for pre-trials or trials those days. And those were legally possessed firearms by someone that ended up in someone's hands illegally. And I'm just like everybody else. I don't want the federal government tracking everything I do, as far as for guns and all that stuff. But there's got to be, we have to find some balance.
Well, understand, we're not talking about selling a gun to a potentially known felon or something like that. So that's already illegal. That's not admissible
Right.
now. What we're talking about is what they call universal background sales, which is outlawing those. You mentioned that you would be okay with gifting or willing a gun to somebody. Okay, let's go back to my original question. If I wanted to sell you a gun,
if you want to sell me a gun, I wouldn't have any issues with that.
But is there an instance, just going back on your conversation, is there an instance where you see that you would not be in support of 2 people selling a gun to one another? Again, we're not talking about felons.
Right.
Those are already
Yeah.
out of the picture. I'm not considering those. I'm talking about
Law-abiding citizens.
Do you see law-abiding citizens not being able, at any point, not being able to just have private sales, transfers, gifts, or anything like that amongst them?
I hope not.
Okay.
I don't.
When you say you hope not, do you mean you hope a law isn't passed? Or
I
want to know
I hope
what
that
your
I
stance
hope
is
that I
on
don't see.
that.
I hope that I don't see that.
If they pass a law saying you can't do that, how would you approach that as sheriff of the parish?
Those are things that, as sheriff of the parish, I can tell you honestly, don't know because well, like I said, I hope we don't get to that point where that's another right that's restricted that we have, and I hope that our leaders don't infringe any more on us for that. And if we do, it's like any other law. I'll have to look at it, see exactly how it's written, see if there's any, see if it, if taking something, when there's a taking, there has to be a due process of it, and just the outright taking of it without due process, extreme issues with where we're going to have issues. I'll probably, whoever's the legal.
We'll get to that on the next question.
Yeah, whoever's. Those are things where you get with whoever our Attorney General is at that time, and, kind of like Jeff Landry has in the past, fight those different battles legally.
Let's move on to number 3. In states that have them, red flag confiscation laws, sometimes referred to as extreme risk protection orders, allow any individual to petition a court to issue a protective order requiring the accused to immediately relinquish all firearms and ammunition and giving law enforcement the authority to confiscate all firearms and ammunition from people who are accused, not convicted, accused of being a danger to themselves or others. All this can take place without the accused's knowledge and without any constitutional required due process. If Louisiana were to implement a red flag confiscation law, would you as sheriff enforce it? And the reason why this is so near and dear to my heart is because there was a state rep, now he's a state senator, who has copied and pasted the red flag gun laws that other states have already implemented. So it is a hard push, and as you probably well know, that when laws are going to be implemented or introduced at the state level, they seem extreme at first, but when they keep getting brought up the same one, more and more people learn to accept that. I'm fearful that with the federal government passing that safer, whatever it is, Bipartisan Safer Communities Act last year, there's a bunch of grant money, I'll call it bribe money, that's earmarked to send to the local level, whether it's state, municipal, parish level, city, whichever, to try to get people to implement these red flag gun laws. So it's a real thing. The federal government has already tried to encourage that, and our state wants it also.
What's real here? It's Senate Bill 212.
Right. So technically, it's on the horizon. Not saying it's ever going to pass, because if we get the right governor in there, it may not. But it's a reality.
It is.
I want to know how you would approach that. If you, as sheriff of Calcasieu Parish, if you have a judge who issues a court order that says this guy is deemed a threat because somebody called in and said that he was a threat to himself or somebody else, I need you to send your deputies 2 o'clock in the morning, because we don't want this guy to know we're going, and that's when they're usually executing these, at 2 o'clock in the morning. You kick the door in, you handcuff the guy, you confiscate all of his guns, and you tell him, oh, by the way, this is why we're here. Now he gets his day in court. How do you handle that as sheriff?
So I've spent a little bit of time looking at the current Senate bill. That's, I don't know if it's just kind of stalled, or I don't know where it's at, but I don't think it just kind of.
It's not popular now.
So, but I spent time looking at it and just trying to wrap my brain around what the process, just to kind of analyzing the process of it and what they were trying to pass here. And I forget who the
Gary Carter.
Yeah. Basically, the way it was lined out here was that the district attorney would file a petition. The petition would be signed pretty much ex parte, and there'd be a hearing within 21 days, something with a couple weeks. And, it kind of made me think about some of the other ex parte processes we have in the court systems and how they work and how those things get to. But in this one, it was more of a concern of how does it get to the DA here? How does it get to, I was looking at it in the same capacity of, I don't know if you're familiar with not protective orders, emergency orders where for mental health, for when somebody's EPC'd or OPC'd for mental health issues. And, that's where you go to the coroner's office, you tell that, you fill an affidavit, you sign off and say, this, and this. And if if you're signing it, and there's an affidavit saying if you're lying about this, you can be prosecuted, and then that's signed and it's brought to the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office goes pick that person up. They go to the hospital. If the doctors say, they have, reasons to be committed, they're kept at the hospital for so many days. But there's no court hearing after that. So that's a different procedure. But it's just kind of with this, how does it get there? How does the DA, who's presenting the information? Is the information coming from law enforcement? Is it coming from a citizen? Where you go in and you file and say, hey, I know this person's a little off, and I'm going to sign an affidavit and file this with you, and the DA then files the petition. How do we get there? It goes back to what I was talking about, back to earlier, and that's where I was spent more time thinking about the whole due process of this, to where your rights are infringed upon. The legislature says, well, it's only for a short time frame till we can figure things out, or you can prove whatever. The red flag laws, I think, have like most laws and most things, there's a good idea or a valid intent-ish to it, but it's how do we get there, and how do we get the enforcement of it where we're not infringing upon people's rights, where we're not violating your right to own a gun, and it's like you said, showing up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, that depends, is the report or the indication that he's barricaded in a house, that he's brandished a firearm. There's just so many variables into it that bill just didn't address, and I was hopeful that wouldn't get past just a piece of paper that was filed.
Well, you as an attorney can appreciate this probably better than anything,
Yeah.
so I ask you specifically, the ex parte part is the problem, because
Right.
that's the part that eliminates due process.
Correct.
If somebody were to knock on your door and say, we're probably going to come take your guns, but you're going to have your say in front of a judge first, well, I'm still not okay with confiscating guns, because if a person is a danger to society, why are you taking anything? If they're the threat, they're still a threat, regardless of the tool that they actually have.
They're going to find another tool.
Yes. So while I'm not in favor of that either, I still see that as at least a more acceptable form of it. But any of them that include ex parte where it eliminates due process, that's my concern.
Same.
Because that is a violation of the Constitution. I want to know your thoughts on that. If a judge said that you have to go to this guy's house, take his guns from him, he does not know we're coming, and I need your deputies to go over there and take this guy's guns in the middle of the night, how do you approach that? Do you refuse that order from the court, or do you just administer it and say, I'm doing my job?
So I can say with that part of it, if there's a court order signed by the judge, we have the laws that our government have put into place. We have to abide the laws that are in place, and as far as for the court orders. Now, to get there and to be part of the fight before those laws get put into place, I will 100% be part of the fight through whoever my legal representation will be at that time, through the Attorney General's office, whoever, to make sure, again, because as a lawyer, I appreciate it. I'm not saying I appreciate it more than everyone else, but I think I understand it a little bit more, and I know that sometimes these laws get passed and things aren't considered and thought about. With a lot of it, I try to apply other things that, other mechanisms in the court, and see how we do that and how could it be done to preserve those rights. So with 100% certainty, I can tell you my goal would be, before that the law would ever be implemented, that to have to enforce it, we would fight every bit of the way to make sure that everyone's rights were protected 100%, that the due process is covered. Now, if it gets through everything and we lose everything, and I'm hypothetically saying it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says that it's legal, that we can do this ex parte, blah 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 blah, and if a judge signs it, then we have to enforce it. I'm not going to put any of my deputies at stake of being in contempt of court or violation of court orders. We're going to enforce the law, because that's my duty as a sheriff.
Not to drill down on this, but I want to make sure we have clarification on it too. I want to make this point that I've made with some of the other candidates. When you say that you would be enforcing the law because the judge gave you the court order, I want to make it very clear that you as an attorney can certainly appreciate this. You can follow the law and violate the Constitution at the same time. And the law comes from the Constitution.
Right.
So you could actually violate somebody's due process because it's the law, and you're administering the law, and you just violated their constitutional rights. So I want to make sure we're very clear about that. You as a sheriff would be swearing that oath to the Constitution,
right,
not to uphold all laws, to uphold the Constitution. So I want to make sure we understand that enforcing a law isn't always enforcing the Constitution.
Right. No. And that's what I said before. When the law goes into effect, or whenever the law is presented or signed off on, where whoever my legal representation would be, and whoever the Attorney General would be, hopefully they'd be on the same side as with me, and probably a lot of other sheriffs in the state, to fight through our Supreme Court and potentially the United States Supreme Court to get through, if The fight would be for the constitutionality of it, and to fight through that part of the system before it ever gets to whether I'm violating someone's laws.
And just know this, and,
Yeah.
and I'm not picking on you here. I just want you to
Yeah.
know that currently, if a law were in place and a judge gave you a court order that violated somebody's due process, I'm not telling you what to do. You could refuse that.
Well,
you could refuse to go confiscate that guy's guns. As sheriff, you could. You could say, I'm not sending my deputies to do that.
We can. There are, well, I won't get into that. That's a whole nother issue for a different forum.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Hey,
Yeah.
Again, I'm not trying to drill down too much on this. I just want to make it very clear, because look, I just want you to know this. If I don't bring these points up, people who are watching these videos are going to bring them up and beat me up. So I want to make sure that I know that I'm representing those guys out there and asking the questions. And if we don't get that question, because this is a big deal. This is way too real. This is not as hypothetical as I think people think it might be, because it continues to get brought up. And I believe that with the amount of grant money that the federal government is earmarking right now, somebody's going to cave. Somebody is going to see the new, what they call them, Bearcats, the new Bearcat out there. Ooh, we can get a new Bearcat if we just implement a red flag gun law in our parish. You could do that as sheriff. You could take that money and say, now we're going to implement these types of laws.
Yeah.
That's what's scary to people, is that there's a lot of money being thrown at this from the federal government to try to entice people to enforce unconstitutional laws. And, money talks in a lot of cases. I mean, we talked before we went on how corrupt politics can be. Mm-hmm. That's what corrupts them. Is that money. So anyway, not to drill that down on that, I just want to be real clear on that.
No, I understand. And like I said, my biggest, the difficulty for me is I have my law enforcement hat that I wore for 15 years, that's easy for me. I have my, I'm a gun owner, I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, there's the part of my head that says absolutely not, you're not coming to take my guns, but then there's the lawyer that's in my head that says, all right, we got to go through, there's a process, we got to go through this, we got to battle it here, we got to battle it here, we got to battle it here. Before we jump to here, and before I'm going to say, we're going to be setting up barriers and fences and, going all the way to the extremes to make sure we keep our guns and that we do this and we do that, there's a process, and legally the process starts when we go through it and how we're going to fight it before that ever gets into a law.
Fair enough. Let's move on to number 4.
Okay.
If the non-legislative, non-lawmaking ATF were to attempt to require the sheriff's office to enforce a ruling that Congress did not pass as a law per the Constitution, would your sheriff's office attempt to enforce it? And I think probably the closest thing in my mind that is a real thing is the whole stabilizing brace issue, that they've tried to say that if you have a stabilizing brace on an AR pistol, that now has somehow magically become an SBR, and you're in possession of an illegal SBR, and you can actually get 10 years in prison, I think a $250,000 fine. That is unconstitutional. That violates every single thing that I know of, because Congress did not pass that law. Now, Congress, in a cowardly way, may have ceded a lot of that power to the ATF as a rulemaking body just to go out and make rules that we're supposed to follow as a quasi-law. But if Congress isn't passing that law, it is not a law. And you as a sheriff are not required to enforce a rule if Congress did not pass it as a law. So if the ATF interprets that you now have an SBR, which it's not, it's absolutely not. I mean, in fact, court battles are going on all over the country.
I was just about to say
right now.
that's currently being litigated.
Yeah, big time.
I think in
It'll
every
get
state.
struck down,
Yeah.
but they could. Technically, it's a law right now. I say a law. Technically, it's a ruling right now that's being administered as a law. It is in place right now. There just happens to be some stays and things like that right now. How would you handle that? If the ATF came to you and said, hey, we need you to enforce this rule, and you know that Congress has not passed it as a law, how would you administer that?
Two parts of that question. One, if it's not a law, if it's not federal law, state law, anything like that, we're not enforcing it. If it's their rules, their policies, their procedures, I don't work for ATF, those kind of things. With regards to if Congress gives them the power and says that their rules or laws or however they can work that, again, kind of like the states that are fighting it right now, go through the proper channels, get it in the courthouse, keep it out of, prevent it from becoming a law and fight it through the proper channels in the courts.
Well, and while Congress may have kind of sidestep their own responsibilities, they still, per the Constitution, cannot give the ATF that power to make
Correct.
that law. It still has to be voted on by Congress.
Correct.
I just want to make sure that we understand that the ATF, and look, I know that law enforcement has to have a relationship with the ATF. I know that there's a lot of things where they kind of cross and they work with one another depending on what the crime scene might be, tracing guns and things like that. So there's already going to be a relationship that would have to be built between you and people at the ATF. And I wonder if the new sheriff would have the ability to look the ATF in the eye, the people that they work with, and go, I'm not enforcing that. And that's important to me to know, that the sheriff can separate that and know that, yes, while I have a working relationship with these people, I can also tell them no on things like this.
Well, and that's where, in telling them no, I can tell them why I'm telling them no. I can tell them, have a legal basis for why we're doing what we're doing. Tell them that, we're not going to do this. We don't have to follow your rules. Yeah, we have to follow your, as far as for compliance, different things like, just various reasons for possessions and those kind of things, and, regulations and keeping track of stuff. But as far as for those kind of things that aren't laws, I'll say this, I don't have any issues telling anybody no, or what we're going to do, or what we're going to do when we get to those situations. If and when we get to those situations and the time comes to make decisions, I'm going to make those decisions.
Okay.
So,
Number 5, our neighbors directly to our north, Beauregard Parish, are an official Second Amendment sanctuary parish, which means that any new law that is passed which is against or violates the people's Second Amendment rights in any way will not be enforced with any local funds or utilizing any local law enforcement. As Sheriff of Calcasieu Parish, would you consider making Calcasieu Parish a Second Amendment sanctuary parish? Now, this is not the sheriff's responsibility to do that. The parish themselves, the police jury, are the ones who would bring up that proposal. My question is, would you be willing to be an active part of that team, and would you support the parish being a Second Amendment parish?
So it's definitely something that would be part of consideration to support, but it would be something that not only myself as the sheriff, and I don't want to sit down with all the, the marshals in the area, all the police chiefs in the area, where it's us as a unified front of law enforcement and the police jury as to what we're going to do. Do I think that needs to be my decision, or like I said, like I told you earlier, my feelings, Dustin, the gun owner, is different than Dustin, who's the lawyer, and then Dustin, the sheriff, because I have different responsibilities and different oaths and obligations to uphold. So, me personally would absolutely 100% want to say yes to do that, but me as sheriff understands that it's not just me, and there's the whole parish, from Vinton to Iowa, covering the whole parish, and all the police chiefs and marshals in between that we have to be on the same page, sitting down, having discussions about how that would be implemented and what we would do one way or the other.
I would recommend, just as a side note, if you guys are able to assemble a team like that of all law enforcement heads, that you include somebody outside law enforcement also, because I think that you're going to get a different point of view. I think some people that have been in law enforcement their entire life get in that rut sometimes. I've testified at the State House in Baton Rouge before, and you'd be surprised the law enforcement who truly in their hearts believe that they are better trained than the average citizen is. And I will tell you, I go to the range pretty often. Most of the people that I see at the range are way more trained and qualified to have a firearm than most law enforcement. I'm not talking about SWAT guys and guys who are specialist guys, but in general, most law enforcement will tell you 2 times a year law enforcement touches their guns, and that's when they have to qualify. So most people are better trained and have better awareness and ability when it comes to guns, and that's where if a committee gets assembled of law enforcement heads, I would highly recommend civilians be involved in that.
So I can tell you, part of what I do for my administration is I want to have a citizens advisory board, not after the fact, but a beforehand to meet with, not just for things like this, but for just in general stuff with the department and the parish, but specifically for things like this. What's the community's opinion? Ideally, I want someone from each police jury district on that I can have roundtable conversations with on a regular basis to get the community's input. Because that's where, as when I wear the sheriff hat, that's my job, as to what the issues of the community are and what the community wants. So.
Well, Dustin, can you tell our viewers where they can go to get more information about your campaign?
Yeah, you can. Probably the easiest, most accessible is going to be Dustin Abshire for Calcasieu Parish Sheriff. Also, I have abshireforsheriff.com. Those are the two easiest ways to get a hold of me. abshireforsheriff.com. You can also email me at abshireforsheriff@gmail. And again, the easiest thing is message me on Facebook. If you message me on Facebook, the 9 out of 10 chances you're going to get me responding to you. So.
Sounds good. Thank you for your time, Dustin.
Appreciate
I wish you all the best in the
Thank you,
election.
sir. Thank you.
God save the Queen, man.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America.
He's over!